And it shows the worldview poisoning, because that's the dynamic that this entire natural argument is based upon. What do you think human nature is? What do you think the possibility for change is? If these aspects of the psyche, about how we view these dynamics of the world that we're living in and our expression of consciousness is poisoned, I've called this worldview poisoning. These are the type of thoughts we're going to have. These are the type of views we're going to hold on to. And they're completely imbalanced. They're completely poisoned. And ultimately, they keep us in a state of powerlessness. And the only way to get beyond that point is to heal worldview by understanding what true human nature is about and understanding the value of individual life. We talked about this in the section. As a matter of fact, that was like the first real solution I got into, was worldview poisoning. I believe that's the first solution on the grassroots solutions for positive and lasting change that we listed and talked about. If you don't heal the worldview, nothing is going to be orderly or healed from that point forward. You're not going to create any kind of positive expression or manifestation if your worldview continues to be poisoned. And this is part of the natural argument for carnism that we have to get past. The third is necessary. And the main expression for this, people actually have made biological arguments, I'm sorry, not biological, ecological arguments for why we have to keep eating meat, which is so ridiculous. I'm not even going to talk about it, because the meat industry is one of the biggest ecological polluters of the entire world. And if you look at how much, if you just look at the stats regarding how much environmental degradation it takes to raise a pound of meat versus plant food, the stats are absolutely staggering. You know, I mean, we're doing so much destruction to the environment by the practice of animal rearing, animal husbandry, and carnism, that it's almost incalculable, the impact that this is having on the living system of the earth. The main aspect of the necessary argument isn't even just this ecological one, this ridiculous ecological one. It's the fact that we need to consume meat to be healthy. And this is complete logical fallacy as well, as I'm going to explain. And this is all born in meat industry propaganda. Part of the argument that was made for this was done in the book called The Vegetarian Myth by Lierre Keith. And I do encourage people to read this book. Okay, I'm not going to tell you don't read the propaganda for the other side. Absolutely check it out. I'd try to suggest borrowing it so you're not giving money to a diseased worldview like that, or trying to find it online. But if you read this book with open eyes and ears, if you read this book understanding the worldview poisoning aspects, if you read this book understanding the attachment, the ego attachment that is born, that has reached full expression in many people, and you understand the lack of willpower on people's part and ignorance on people's part regarding how real health is generated through nutrition. This woman seems to make convincing arguments to people who are not really in the know, because she argues these things normal, natural, necessary. That's the main crux of her argument. Very much ignores and takes the emphasis off of the actual suffering of these beings, the actual suffering of the animals. She knows hardly anything about real nutrition. She doesn't understand nutrient density in plant-based foods, how to unlock that, how to take that into the human body. She was doing veganism all wrong, completely wrong. And I'm not even going to completely advocate just a vegan diet. I don't have a problem with the vegetarian diet, or what some people have called the non-strict vegetarian diet, one that incorporates dairy products, which are animal byproducts. If you want to go full vegan, wonderful. Make sure you understand the health concerns associated with that to do it, and do it the right way. This person was not doing it the right way. And then blaming the dietary choice itself or lifestyle itself because she didn't have the full information regarding how to do it right. You know, she's pushing this Paleolithic diet, which again is another form of meat industry propaganda and poisoned worldview based on this Darwinistic notion of linear evolution, civilization, linear progress of civilizations. So she makes erroneous statements in the book as well, saying that, you know, we have a dietary need for saturated fat and cholesterol, which we don't. The liver makes the amount of cholesterol that we need, and we can get all of the essential fatty acids from plant-based foods. The essential fatty acids can be taken in from the plant-based foods, the things that the brain actually needs to build the neocortex of the brain, the whole brain, but specifically the neocortex, which is responsible for higher order thought function and truly human characteristics, and especially conscience and more moral concerns. All of that can be gotten through plant foods. I'm going to talk about what is necessary by the body and talk about what plant-based foods we can derive those nutrients from. And believe me, they're in these plant-based foods in dense quantities. There's no reason that the human being, now or ever, needed to actually consume dead animal flesh. This is a myth. This is something that has been propagated by people who want this practice to continue unabated and unchallenged in the mind. And it's provably false. The idea that it is necessary to eat meat is provably false. First of all, I honestly, you know, people who love the entire backing up every single solitary claim that is ever made by the human voice, you know, they want me to provide actual claims for this, and I'm going to. I'm going to actually provide the claims, what is necessary by the body, the knowledge of what is necessary to be taken into the body, and what plant-based foods we can get that from today on the show. And the problem here is that people actually don't think that simple experience is proof of the invalid nature of the belief that you need meat. I'm a healthy, energetic, intelligent, vital being, and I do not consume dead animal flesh, and haven't for 5 years. 5 years ago, when I went through a deeper aspect of the awakening before I started speaking, I finally reconciled this immoral behavior that I was participating in with the knowledge that I had taken into myself, and I willed myself to stop doing that immoral practice. So what we have to understand is there are people who are simply living proof, experiential proof, that that argument is a logical fallacy, and have been for hundreds of years. We're going to talk about that more when we get into the occult side of things. I'm going to be bringing up work by high-level Rosicrucians and Freemasons on the topic of the immorality of the consumption of animal flesh. I'm going to be looking into the works of Max Heindel probably next week on this topic from the Rosicrucian cosmo-conception. And I'll post links to all of this information as well with this podcast. We'll be getting into the law of assimilation. I'll be reading excerpts from the document known as Vegetarianism and Occultism by the Freemason C.W. Leadbeater. And it's a phenomenal short essay, I guess you could call it. It's not really a book, that really gets deeply into the moral reasons and the occult reasons for ceasing the practice of carnism. So the necessary argument Let's take a look at some of its claims. There's this thing known as the protein myth, that you can only get the proteins needed for the human body by taking in animal flesh. And this is incorrect. This is a logical fallacy that is repeated. It's a myth that is believed in by people. Let's take a look at what the body actually really does need. The body does need protein. This is true. The fallacy comes in that the proteins that we need can only be found in animal matter, in dead animal flesh. And that's not the case. Okay? The amino acids that we really need by taking in protein and having the body break it down, that's what the body really needs through protein. So there are tons of plant protein sources. And if you're being a vegan and you're not getting enough protein in your diet, it's because you're doing it wrong. If you're a vegetarian and you're not getting enough protein in your diet, it's because you're not eating right. You don't have enough information about what the body needs and the particular foods that contain those nutrients in high enough densities, and you're not adding those into your diet on a frequent enough basis. And that's it. That's why people fail at veganism and vegetarianism. They don't have the complete knowledge of what needs to be taken into the diet on a daily basis. Protein sources in plant foods come from the following things that you need to add into your diet if you're a vegetarian or a vegan. Legumes, which is lentils, beans, and peas, and chickpeas. That's what you need to take in. That's a big source of protein in the vegetarian and vegan diet. All forms of legumes. Soybeans, which are not technically categorized as legumes, but if you add soy, tofu, tempeh probably better because it's a fermented form of it. A lot of people say that it doesn't have some of the possible bad health benefits of some soy products when it's taken in high amounts. I think soy should be used sparingly, and legumes should be one of your main sources of protein. Grains also have proteins. You can get good amount of protein from millet, from quinoa. Quinoa is an excellent source of protein. That's a grain. A lot of cereals, boxed cereals, if you're going to eat that, people who, I guess don't engage in mostly raw food diet when it comes to veganism aren't going to touch processed foods like that, but cereals have protein in it as well through the grains. Rice has protein. Oats has protein. Wheat, again, it has gluten in it, which is shown to be somewhat detrimental to certain aspects of health as well, but it has protein in it. Dairy products have protein. Milk, cheese, yogurt. Eggs, of course, have protein. Nuts and nut butters. So peanuts, almonds, walnuts, cashews, pecans. There's basically protein in all nuts and nut butters. Seeds have protein. Sesame seeds. Chia. I'm sorry, not chia. Pumpkin seeds. Sunflower seeds. So tons and tons of plant-derived protein sources. For people to say you need to kill animals and eat their flesh to get the protein you need in the human diet is erroneous. It does not hold any scientific weight at all. It's an invalid claim. We need calcium in the human diet for bones. You can get that from soy, tofu. You can get that from cereal grains as well. Okay, you can get that from kale. Kale has protein in it. Broccoli has, calcium. We're talking about calcium now. Kale has calcium in it. Broccoli has calcium. Bok choy is another excellent source of calcium. Legumes also have calcium in them. Again, lentils, beans, chickpeas. Nuts and nut butters also have calcium in them. And seeds also have calcium in them as well. So more plant, vegetable-derived sources, seeds, legumes, plants that have tons of calcium in them. If you're not eating these foods on a daily basis, you're doing vegetarianism and veganism wrong. The human body needs iron, Iron is in many different plant-derived foods as well. Strawberry, tomatoes, broccolis, peppers, etc. Zinc. Zinc is needed in the diet. It's found in grains, wheat, tofu, nuts, seeds, beans, peas, lentils, and cereals. All right. Vitamin B12. This is one of the big arguments against that people bring up against vegetarianism or veganism. Well, vegetarians don't really have any problem getting enough B12 in their diet, because if you're going to eat any eggs or take in milk, there's B12 within those things. Vegans will often have to supplement their diet somewhat with things that are in the things that have B12 within them. Soy beverages, nutritional yeast, and cereals are important when it comes to getting enough B12, vitamin B12 in the diet, and it is an important vitamin. It can be done with a vegetarian diet, and it can even be done in a vegan diet, in a vegan lifestyle. It is not impossible. It requires some will in order to do it and do it properly. And people who aren't doing this properly want to blame the entire lifestyle and the choice, the moral choice, and say somehow it's necessary that we need to take in dead animal flesh. And again, I would say what this really is, if you really read the vegetarian myth and try to psychoanalyze what's really going on in this person, she doesn't have enough knowledge. She harmed her body through the ignorance that she did this type of diet with. She didn't go in with full knowledge. She harmed her body, developed chronic disease as a result, then tries and turn it around and blame it on something other than her own ignorance. And that is what's going on psychologically with Lear Keith. It's transference of blame to someone who, to the actual practice of vegetarianism and veganism, not her ignorance, which actually caused her conditions. And she's not only in a physical condition, I would emphatically state she's in a condition of psychological imbalance. And this is evidenced greatly by some of the statements that she makes when she talks about when she broke her vegan, quote, vegan. I want to say that also emphatically. She didn't really live a vegan lifestyle. She binged on meat because of urges that she had. That's not being vegan. Being vegan is not eating any meat products, any animal products at all. Okay? Even animal derived. Vegetarian, you don't eat meat, you don't eat any animal flesh. You will use eggs, cheese, milk, etc. So dairy products and plant-based foods. But she did not engage in real veganism, number one. So that's a misnomer. When she claims she was vegan for decades, isn't accurate. And secondly, she also betrayed the psychological underpinnings that were really going on in her mind when she basically talked about when she broke her, vegan streak and started eating fish again because she loved tuna fish. And she made the statement that when she ate her first tuna fish sandwich after, being vegan for so long, that she couldn't even believe the absolute incredible euphoric feeling that she got. Every cell in her body was tingling, she put it like, and she said, wow, this is what it really feels like to be fed and to be alive. No, incorrect. That's what it feels like to be an addict and to be getting a fix, because you're still not willfully strong enough to overcome an addiction to an immoral practice. And you're still so hung up on how it makes you feel, meaning not the real you, the higher case S self you, but the lowercase s, the sense self, the 5 sense self. She's so attached to how that felt. Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. No one in my entire circle of friends and family, and you can ask anyone who knows me, anyone who knows people who know me, I challenge you, call them, write to them. Ask people if there's anyone they know in their circle of friends that includes me, okay, if they know me personally, when I was a meat eater, when I was a carnist, who could put away more meat than me. I want you to go and ask them. And seriously, I know personally no one else. I'm not saying there's tons of people who are like, you know, professional eaters and, you know, they're what do you call it? Competitive eaters. I'm not saying I could put away more meat than anybody. I'm saying in my circle of friends and family members, I was able to put away more meat than any other person that I know personally in my life. That's what I am saying. And that can be corroborated by asking anyone who knows me. The amount of meat that I would eat when I was younger, you would have a hard time even conceiving of it. I'll tell an anecdote right now. We went to a place here in Philadelphia. I won't mention the name to plug it, but it's a restaurant that continuously brings you meat that is grilled in a South American barbecue style way. And basically they give you, it's like a total decadent thing. They give you a chip on your table that has a green side and a red side. Literally, this is true. And you keep it on green if you want them, upon seeing that your plate is empty of meat, to come over and bring you more different cuts of meat. And when you're finally full or sated, you flip it to the red side, and they know even if there's anything on your plate or even if your plate's empty, don't bring any more because you've had enough. And we went there, Barb and I went there years ago when we were both still carnists. We were... it was some occasion of someone's birthday or something. We went there with a large group of people. There might have been like 12 or 13 or 14 people. We sat around a big table at this South American barbecue style restaurant, and we, you know, all started with our chips on green and started going, and they started bringing us food. And at the end of the night, everyone was so completely overstuffed and just, you know, gorged, literally gorged. And me and one other friend were sitting there with our chips still on green. I'll say his name. His name was John. We were sitting there. He was a former boyfriend of one of Barb's friends. And he was, you know, kind of a big guy. And me and him are sitting and just going toe to toe, talking about the different cuts of meat and just gorging ourselves. And everyone else was long done, and we were still eating like for 45 minutes after everybody had stopped. And they're just watching us, like laughing that we could possibly put away that much meat on our own. And I think I even slightly outlasted him when he finally flipped over his chip. Mine was still on for like one more bit, barely, you know. But that's what kind of a meat eater I used to be. So again, in many of these cases, when it comes to mindset, when it comes to morality, when it comes to excess, I was one of the worst offenders. You know, I think that actually places people in a deeper position of being able to turn themselves around. It actually almost gives them the benefit or the edge. You know, this is the concept of the lukewarm are in the worst position. Those who are the hottest, in other words, they're in the deepest chasms of consciousness. They have an opportunity to see. It's, you know, that maybe you don't really see the reflection until you're almost at the very bottom of the chasm, of that floor. Then you finally see your reflection in that. And then you have an opportunity really to spring up to the highest, you know, heights. That's kind of the way I look at it. Because if someone like me can do it after the level of attachment that I had to meat, then anyone can. And I'll just tell you another brief anecdote that I said I was going to get into. When I first made the decision to stop eating meat, it was after seeing the movie Earthlings. And basically, I had cognitive dissonance going on within my mind. And many other people will be experiencing this. If you're honest with yourself, and you're still engaged in this practice and you want to see real freedom and you want there to be actual peace and nonviolence on the earth, and you're honest with yourself, you're probably in this condition of cognitive dissonance, trying to reconcile oppositional behavior with knowledge of right and wrong. And I was in this state for a while after seeing that movie. And I made like sort of a subconscious promise to myself. It wasn't even a promise. It was a deep realization and a recognition that now that I know this, now that I know what really goes on, now that I know what I'm a part of, indirectly, I'm an indirect part of it. And that's saying it nicely. That's even a euphemism. What I'm really talking about is I'm a participatory member of violence by proxy and murder by proxy. So I knew that I was contributing to that dynamic. And don't get me wrong, don't think that I'm saying one person stopping eating meat changes the whole dynamic. No, it's all about amount. For a quantum effect to build and then express, a certain amount of people have to make a choice within harmony with natural law. So I'm under no delusions that just me doing this stops it somehow. Oh, it's going on unabated. We could talk about numbers, and I will get into numbers. But, I decided that, again, it's me versus the all. It doesn't matter what the all is doing. I need to worry about what I'm doing. What are my actions contributing to? Am I part of the dynamic of the creation of that suffering? Am I part of the dynamic of the negative injection of energy into the field of consciousness that we're all living in? And the answer was yes. I had to ask myself the question that I tell people to ask in slide number 11. After I'll talk about numbers a little bit and I'll ask that question, but it's essentially, what am I contributing in the way of energy, pumping energy into this dynamic on Earth? Am I on the right side of that equation? Is what my behavior is doing contributing to the negative energetic dynamic on Earth? And the answer was yes. And therefore, I had to approach it apophatically, meaning from the negative perspective, meaning I need to stop doing something that is harmful. Am I engaged in harm or indirect harm? That's the question. Then stop doing that action. It's the apophatic pathway to truth. Is this behavior engaging in harm? Does it include engagement with harm and engagement in the violence ideology, the ideology of violence and domination? And if the answer is yes to that question, then you have to apply apophasis to your behavior. And apophasis is the method of saying no, the practice of saying no, pulling back from that which is doing harm. Again, I've said repeatedly, over and over again, it isn't so much about what we need to start doing. It's almost entirely about what we need to stop doing to create freedom. We're holding freedom back by what we're doing. We stop doing those things. Freedom is the natural expression. It is the actual base underlying form of everything. We just need to learn how to be in that state of consciousness and stop doing what we're already doing. Unfortunately, we've come to such a horrible fall in consciousness that our condition, the default condition that we have created is that, tyranny and enslavement and oppression and violence is like the default condition here on Earth. Well, the only way to really change that is to stop engaging it, stop supporting it, stop obeying it, stop complying with it. Saying no, apophasis, pulling back from engagement in actions that are immoral because they cause harm. Then the manifested result will be peace, order, harmony, freedom, and justice on Earth. Until we pull back from those behaviors, don't expect any of those things. Don't expect them to magically manifest while we're still engaged in harmful, immoral behaviors. The laws of nature do not allow for that. It's an impossibility. It just doesn't work that way, folks. So, I mean, let's briefly talk about numbers. How many animals are murdered in the United States alone? Last year in 2011, in the United States alone, over ready for this figure? 10 billion with a B. Yes, 10 billion. That's a 10 with 9 zeros after it. 10 billion animals, land animals only, were slaughtered in the United States alone in the year 2011. In 1 year. Over 10 billion. That's a low estimate. It was something like 10.3 billion was the actual figure. Over 10 billion with a B animals. And if you factor in aquatic animals, animals that live in water, the sea or fresh water, the total number of animals killed for human consumption in the United States alone just last year, in 1 year, was, you ready for this? 65 billion animals with a B. 65 billion animals only in the United States. That's not the entire world. That is 9 times more than the population. More than 9 times greater than the population of the entire world as far as human beings go. Worldwide figures were astronomically higher. If you take the total amount of animals, both aquatic and land raised, amount of animals slaughtered, killed at the hands of human beings for consumption of their dead flesh in the year 2011 alone in the world, the number is horrific. It's 150 billion animals. 150 billion animal lives were violently taken in the year 2011 alone by a human population of 7 billion people. That is over a 21-to-1 ratio for every person alive on the planet. And I ask people to ask only one question when it comes to looking at those figures. What is this practice doing energetically to the field of energy and consciousness in which we are all living? What do you think it's doing? And I ask you to say, try to find out what it really is doing versus what you think or believe. Try to get actual empirical data about what that's actually doing. And it's possible to do that work. If you really want to know, that answer lies within all of us. The true answer to that question about what that is doing lies within each and every one of us. If we're honest with ourselves. If we're willing to do the work to go within ourselves to acquire that answer. You may not find that answer in a school book or an encyclopedia or even on the internet, but it exists, and there is a truth regarding it. And I'll tell you what it's doing. And don't believe me. Try to know for yourself. That is turning the energetic vibratory energy, the vibratory dynamic of this planet, into a hell world. These animals suffer inhumane and cruel treatment, often not even being able to stand, treated like a thing. You watch the movie Earthlings and put yourself in the position of one of those animals. And if you can't identify with that level of suffering, you are a speciesist, as they call it in Earthlings, at the very, very best. But really, what I would say that someone who can't really I would say if someone does not really have a deep, visceral, emotional gut reaction in a negative way to what they see in the movie Earthlings, you should be seriously concerned that you are already at least a secondary psychopath. And I know that's like, you know, a catch-22, because how can a psychopath really be concerned about anything? Well, maybe it's not, because psychopaths are generally concerned about themselves, but they just don't care that they don't care. You know, that's how psychopathy works. So I'll suggest it in a different way. If you watch this movie with someone else and they don't have a visceral, emotional gut reaction to what they're seeing in a negative way, then you will be really empowered to know that you're probably most likely dealing with a psychopath. And I would say if you're going to watch it with somebody else, try to be wary about whether they're feigning that concern, that emotional reaction. You could tell if you're good enough at reading people whether they're faking it or not. Because if it's not going to produce that, empathetic, painful reaction in the human heart, I feel tragically sorry for anyone, because they've been turned into something that is quite less than a human being, and they've been robbed of a birthright, which is to truly feel. So that's my challenge, and I'll be posting the link to the movie. And I've told people in the past I didn't recommend them watching it because of that reason. I'm going to reverse my position on that and say, if you really want to get involved in the real dynamic of why human freedom isn't a present condition here on the earth, and probably is not going to be for a long, long, long time, as long as we stay attached to these erroneous belief systems and these false axioms that we have built our behavior upon. I would suggest that Earthlings is actually a good movie to view to understand why that dynamic is in place. And next week, I'm going to really talk about the occult aspects of this dynamic and really get into the principle of correspondence. I put a somewhat comical image, if you could even call it that I found out there floating around as an internet meme. A human being laying on a table with aliens around him saying all the different justifications for the continuance of carnism. Oh, we have our own problems. We don't have time to worry about whether they suffer or not. And this guy's laying out on their feast table with an apple in his mouth, surrounded by, vegetables and trimmings. This is in image number 12. They kill other animals for our food, so why shouldn't we do the same? Oh, there's that erroneous logical fallacy, quote, unquote, natural argument. Don't worry, this one was killed humanely, quote, unquote. The logical fallacy that you can murder something humanely. I do feel bad, but I could never give up my meat. It's just too tasty. Let's be honest, that's what the real justification is in everyone's mind. They don't want to employ the will. They don't want to exercise the will to change an existing behavior that is ultimately destructive and is ultimately creating part of the creating dynamic of why we are enslaved. And if you don't understand that, you still don't really get the why. You can only see the what. You can see the symptom, and you might disagree with the symptom, and you may not want the symptom present, but you still don't have the master key of why in hand that it's happening, because you do not grasp the principle of correspondence, the law of correspondence. That as we do to others will be done unto us. The end for all eternity. I call this the fundamentally flawed idea of the natural order, which has nothing to do with the actual natural order in nature. Zero to do with it. It's based on a completely erroneous assumption, based on very brief, thin slicing instances of time. And you're making a judgment on what the totality of the natural order actually is. And it has nothing whatever to do with that erroneous perception. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit later on the show. The third justification, God gave us dominion over the animals. I love this one. Can't you tell how much I love this one, folks? This is my favorite of them all. God gave us dominion over all the animals. So that means we can murder them and just use them as we please. Yeah. Yeah, that's God's commandment to us, right? He said, you can go and murder as viciously, violently, and abundantly as you want, as long as you're doing it to animals, not other human beings. Just go and do it to them, because they're completely separate from my creation. You're my favored ones, but them, I don't really care about what you do to them. So just go right ahead. And Christians actually believe this bunk. They actually interpret the Bible in a way that allows for their immoral justifications and their diseased psyches to say, I'm just going to continue this because I interpret that God claimed that this was okay. And they're not even reading their own book. They don't even understand their own book. They don't even understand. They understand the words of the Christ in their own Bible. Zero. Less than zero. They have what I call negative knowledge of it. Not only do they have no idea what the actual teachings of the Christ consciousness is all about, but they actually have ascribed things to it which have nothing whatsoever to do with it. And to get back to a 0 point, to a clean slate, would involve themselves digging themselves out of a hole for a long time. I call that the state of negative knowledge. Not only don't you know anything, you've put a whole lot of erroneous beliefs on top of the 0 point. So you have to dig your way back to zero. Just read the book of Genesis, first of all. If you want to even acknowledge this whole notion of, the Bible says, to engage in this kind of practice or not engage in this kind of practice, I think that's a horrible way of judging what's right and wrong. First of all, is that men wrote it in a book and claimed that it was the inspired word of God, and therefore I'm going to just follow that blindly. You need to know, you need to develop true conscience, which is the definitive knowledge of the objective difference between right and wrong. Not have a belief system about what you think is right or think is wrong, and then back it up with man-written words that you're claiming is the divine and inspired word of God. Let me tell you something. The Bible is written by flawed men for the reasons of their own agenda. And yes, they're putting some truths in there, absolutely. Because to have a poison pill be taken by anyone, you need to wrap it in a whole lot of good stuff. Otherwise, you'll smell the poison, you'll taste the poison, and you won't want to take it into yourself. That's how that technique of obfuscation works. That's how that technique of worldview poisoning works. To get the poison in, you have to wrap it up in something that is very good. And I'm not saying that that's always the case, but with the biblical writings and the specific choice of the canon of the Bible and deliberately obfuscating and eliminating and keeping out of the official canon other books that could be said to be as equally quote unquote divinely inspired. This done during Constantine's reign, the Council of Nicaea. Do the historical research. They're leaving out a whole lot of other things that say things that are in direct opposition and contrast to what's being said in other books of the Bible. So the Bible's self-contradictory, number one. And I'm not saying there aren't good truths to be found in it. I've talked about them many times on this show. But, let's just give a quote from Genesis that supports the idea that God did no such thing as his claim to give us dominion over the animal kingdom and say we could just use them as our food as we see fit. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 29 and 30, and this is before the fall, in consciousness, before this horrific event took place that plunged man into the mindset of the animal kingdom, really, that led to a diminution in his consciousness and awareness. The words of God are attributed to this following quote, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. Let me just read that again. I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. So far, no mention of animals being given to people for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the ground, in other words, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. I'll read that again. To all the beasts of the earth and birds of the air and creatures that move on the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. No mention of other animals, even to the other animals. No mention of humans eating other animals, or even animals eating other animals for that matter. Zero mention of those practices. So I would ask the quote-unquote religious people, they're really nothing of the kind. They're the false religious people. That's why I call this the false religion justification, who don't consider suffering as the main guiding point to bring you to the truth of what actions you should or should not take. If it's generating suffering, you shouldn't be doing it. And I have no problem with the terms you should or you should not. That's part of the New Age bunk agenda, to tell you you should never point a finger at anyone else and say you're engaging in something that you should not be. Because why? Oh, that wounds their little precious ego? So you don't want to say anything about it ever? Nonsense. That's another false religion called the New Age movement. Never ever talk about the negative or threaten someone else's belief system. Oh, because the ego reacts, right? Well, you know what? Maybe that's the whole problem. Maybe people aren't speaking enough about the truth and about what's right. And then other people just think, oh, there's hardly any reaction to this. There's hardly any blowback to this. So I'm just going to continue this practice unabated. No one's really calling me out on it. That's the problem, folks. We don't call each other out on our bullshit. That's the problem. This New Age notion of just letting people do all the harm that they want, never say anything to them, never bring up the negative, never call somebody on the things they should not be doing is nonsense. Nonsense. And anybody teaching that is a false spiritual teacher. So I call this argument the false religion justification, because it's coming from these completely erroneous notions of religion and even what their own books have told them. And yeah, you can find contrary things to the quote I just read you out of Genesis. Fine, you're going to find contradiction in the Bible. You want to know why? It's a man-written book. Again, to justify human agendas. And they put a lot of spiritual truths in it so that people would accept it, but also in doing so accept the other stuff that they were throwing in the mix. And if you don't understand that that's what the Bible is, you're very, very naive. Very naive. Or just trapped in that modality of mind control called religion, which we talked about, and you don't even understand the astro-theological underpinnings of world religions. Go back into the earlier shows and pull up the podcasts on astrotheology to look that up, to understand that. So the next argument, the next justification in favor of carnism. Don't worry, this one was killed humanely. Let's think about that. Just think about these words. Killed humanely. I can't figure this one out. Let's try it again. Killed humanely. Yeah. These are complete antitheses of each other. They're diametric opposites. Treating someone humanely does not involve killing them. So these are polar opposite words, and yet you're using them back to back in the same sentence, trying to get them to mean the same thing. I call this, it's not what I call it, it's Orwellian doublespeak. So this is the 1984 doublespeak justification. You could put two diametrically opposing words together and then in your cognitive dissonance attempt to get them to mean the same thing. Killed humanely. Right. Keep believing that, folks. Keep believing that. Because killing is a humane practice. It can be done in a humane way, right? You're taking someone else's life without their consent, but you could do it in a humane way. Keep believing that. Keep lying to yourself, in other words. The next justification is I call this the separation worldview justification. The idea that we're all separate and opposite, and opposing in nature, and there are beings that think like us, so then we should treat them like we are, like we want to be treated. But anything that's not like us, this is alien or foreign to us. Well, we should treat that with disregard, or that gives us the permission to treat it with disregard. Not necessarily that we should, but if you happen to start treating it with disregard, well, that's okay, because they're not like us. They're not the same as us. The phrase here is they're not conscious or aware like us, so it's okay to kill them for food. And then people will bring the opposite of this argument in as, actually, I've heard this brought up as a justification for continuing to eat meat, saying, well, you eat plants. Plants are a form of life. And we're going to directly address this today. This notion of, well, since plants are a form of life, it's equally as wrong to consume them and make them a part of your diet. I would say that animals don't have free will to the extent that human beings do. I would say they have a modicum of free will, but they haven't crossed into what I would call the epigenetic domain, or the domain of consciousness. They're still essentially beings that are running on instinct, largely. And therefore, they don't have the capacity to truly understand the objective difference between right and wrong behavior. So they're largely operating on instinctual, their instinctual animal nature. We have that instinctual animal nature, but we've also been gifted with a mind that is capable and is advanced, in its development to the complexity where it has the capacity to understand the difference between right and wrong modalities of behavior. And that's what makes us bound by natural law. When you step into that realm of the capacity for knowledge, then you are also taking on the responsibility that goes hand in hand with it. That's why I tell people you cannot look at the animal kingdom and say, well, animals do this to other animals, so therefore it must be okay for human beings to do this to animals, or for human beings to do this to other human beings. And that's an absolutely flawed, illogical, fallacious argument. It's a logically fallacious argument. We are held to a higher standard than the animal kingdoms, because we don't just have the instinctual response mechanisms that animals do. We also have the higher thought functions that human beings have been gifted with as a result of our developmental, natural evolutionary progression, the development of our species in consciousness. So because we've crossed into that epigenetic domain where we have the capacity for holistic intelligence, that makes us bound by the laws of morality. So that's where I would say the human beings and animals different. You cannot apply natural law as I'm talking about it to the animal kingdom and say, well, hey, that lion's going to have a lot of karmic debt coming down upon it because it took down that gazelle on the the plains of Africa and devoured it with its pride. No, it doesn't. Natural law doesn't work that way for the animal kingdom. If a human being went out and just hunted another human being and cannibalized it, yeah, there's going to be a lot of karmic consequence because of that, because we are held to a higher account because of our level of complexity in mind. So I hope that really explains my take on how natural law fits in with the human species as opposed to the animal kingdom. We are more than just any other animal. One thing I do want to say regarding your first comment on not choosing to consume animals or animal products for food. I am in the process of going full vegan. I'd say I'm about 98% there. My last holdout is I'll still have a piece of pizza every now and again, but I've found a good vegan pizza place in Philadelphia where have been ordering from. So I've been moving toward going full vegan to eliminate the suffering that goes along with the other animal products, as well as just the meat industry as well. Oh, I definitely think that it is. I think that level of suffering that is being brought into the world needlessly. And, people will still debate and argue, well, we need this animal product in our diet. It's pretty much been conclusively proven we don't really need meat or animal products in the human diet. It is very, very possible to live, especially in the modern world, with the way food production and flow happens in the world, to live without any animal products in the diet. So, I've been using coconut oil. Instead of butter, I've been making non-dairy ice cream. I got a homemade ice cream maker, and I make great non-dairy ice creams with fresh produce and coconut milk as a base, or almond milk as a base. I've been buying almond-based cheese and shredding that over pizza, or making a grilled cheese sandwich with that quote-unquote cheese. There's a lot of good and easy substitutes when it comes to how we can supplement our diet with non-animal based products that are just plant-based. So I think that the argument that consuming animals and animal byproducts in the ways that we do is as being necessary doesn't hold much water for me. And it's a controversial stand because people are so attached to it. Like I said, carnism is a religion. Eating meat is a religion. No, literally, it's something that we're so attached to. It's a programmed behavior that we don't even think about because it's been so ingrained in us from the moment we've been born, essentially. Sure. And that goes hand in hand with the law of assimilation. The law of assimilation, as it is called in different occult schools of thought, that you're going to have to break things down, and so much less energy is going to have to go into that process because it is less complexified. The more complexified the form of energy you're putting into your body, the more your body has to go to work breaking it down. So it takes a larger amount of energy to assimilate it, and you're going to not have that energy available to other tasks and other areas of operation that you want to be working on, whether in yourself or in your daily life. So the law of assimilation would definitely go jibe with that. That if you want that energy available for other things, you don't want it to be going to work in the breaking down of things like meat products and other things that are going to be hard to assimilate. Sure. And just think about we're consuming all the negative energy that goes into the slaughter of those animals, the fear that they're living in, the way that they're caged, the way that they're kept in basically completely inhumane conditions, and then they're slaughtered, and we're taking in all that fear-based energy, into our own bodies. And it's this other thing, people don't even look at it from just a simple, in terms of 3D physical energy. Wouldn't it make just a whole lot more sense to get your energy directly from plants, which is where these animals get their energy from to grow? Then you're eating them, but really what's nourishing you is what they took into their body. So you're taking it secondhand. And then that makes more plants have to be grown, and harvested anyway. If you just went right to the real source, which is the plant, you're going to get it firsthand, and you're going to absorb it more readily through the law of assimilation. And the other aspect of this is really where all of the energy is coming from, ladies and gentlemen. In case you haven't figured it out yet, is the sun. That's where really we get all of our energy, through our food. So what's more directly connected to the sun? Those animals or those plants? I think it's real simple to figure out. We were talking with Patty from Illinois, and I'll get right back to her in a moment. I just wanted to say, we were talking about veganism and just essentially transitioning to a non-animal-based diet. And I want to say a lot of the mistakes that I think people make when they try to transition to a vegetarian lifestyle is, one, they do it too quickly. And I don't think this is something that you should just go cold turkey on. I've said this before on my shows. I think this is one of the things that makes people fail at doing this. They try to just completely get off meat immediately and get off dairy immediately. You have to slowly transition off of it. I feel you do. You don't want to make really quick, sudden, abrupt changes to the chemistry of the body. Okay? The body is a complex mechanism with a lot of chemical interactions taking place within it, and anything you do immediately, right away, 100% cold turkey is going to be a shock to the whole system. So I think that's one of the first big mistakes a lot of people make when they transition to a vegetarian lifestyle, is they try to do it too fast or all at once cold turkey, and that's definitely the wrong way to go about doing it. The other thing I want to say is, and just highlight this in all capital letters with 1,000 exclamation points. If you're going to attempt to eat vegetarian or vegan, not to juice is the biggest mistake that you can possibly make in this lifestyle. Absolutely the biggest mistake that you can possibly make. If you are going to try to eat vegetarian or transition over to a vegan lifestyle, you absolutely must own a juicer and use it just about every single day of your life. Period. And, you know, if you don't want to understand that, then I don't know what to tell you. But because juicing is the most important thing that you could possibly be doing for your health, as far as I'm concerned. That, in addition to purifying your water. You got to purify water, and you got to get on to good juices. I mean, right now I'm drinking a big glass right here of carrot, kale, spinach, cucumber. I mean, you drink that juice every day. I'm telling you, people will say, where does your protein come from on a vegetarian or vegan diet? Right there. Right there. And I guarantee you I'm getting more than you just ate in that steak, probably. Okay? Spinach, carrots, kale. I mean, you name it. Any leafy greens you're going to be getting protein. Definitely in spinach. Definitely in carrots also there's protein. Kale, you're going to get probably more calcium than drinking any kind of milk. Vitamin A and C. Vitamin K, of course, in any leafy greens usually. There's tons of phosphorus, which is great for the brain. You know, potassium, iron. You know, it has all the phytonutrients you need right there in that green juice. You know, and here's the secret, folks. If you're going to juice, okay, greens, put a carrot through with the greens. That's how you get the maximum green juicing out of those green leafy vegetables. You get an auger juicer if you don't have the money to buy an auger juice. Hey, as a matter of fact, forget that. I used to say, hey, auger juicers were really expensive. They're not anymore. You can get an auger juicer for under $100 now. A good one, too. About $99 will get you a decent vertical auger juicer, single auger. Okay, which will make you a high quality juice from just about any kind of produce that you could possibly think of. All right, you know, you put the greens in there, and then, you know, send a carrot through, and trust me, you're going to have a great yield when you do it with that method. But I'm just saying, not to juice on a vegetarian or vegan lifestyle is the biggest mistake that you can possibly make on that type of eating, in that lifestyle. Not to juice is the number one mistake. And whenever I've asked people who have said I've tried to go vegetarian and it didn't work out for me, you know, I asked them, were you juicing the whole time you tried to go vegetarian? No. The answer is always the same, invariably, every time, 100%. I've never heard anybody that said, I tried to go vegetarian, it didn't work out for me, and the whole time I was making this effort, I was juicing. Anybody who tries it with juicing usually succeeds. If they try it and they weren't juicing, they have a hard time with it. Not to juice is the biggest mistake in this transition, and I can't underscore that enough.
So, yeah.
I agree.
Juicing them is a great way to concentrate that nutrition.
Yep. And there's no way you could eat as much as you pour in a glass of juice. If I tried to eat the amount of kale or spinach that went into making this, I'd be there for half the day, literally. You know, but I could drink a whole glass of that green juice with some carrot in there for a bit of sweetness and some beta carotene and other good protein. And I mean, it's delicious, number one, and you're nourishing all the trillions of cells in the body in the process. So, people have to get on to juicing. I mean, I hammer that on everybody I talk to that's trying to improve their diet. Juicing is the number one way to do it, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that, and I really like smoothies as well.
Sure.
I make a lot of green smoothies with, you know, spinach and bananas and things like that.
Get a good high-powered blender. If you could afford it, a Vitamix is a great device. I personally own one. They're a little on the expensive side, but it's an investment in your health. You know, it beats paying high-priced allopathic medical bills, you know? Well, I can speculate. I will speculate that I feel that it does, because I think that we are largely living in a completely disconnected state from what we were originally intended to be, because of the type of manipulation that has taken place with our species and our genetic, material through our genome. So I think that we are living in that cut-off way, and part of it is because of what happened to us in the ancient past, which we're going to be getting into talking about in coming weeks. As what I'm going to read momentarily is true to the original esoteric intentions of the original ancient Freemasonic tradition. So this is written by the Freemason C.W. Leadbeater. And that is, of course, a pseudonym because he's, the beater of the lead, the metals, the base metals, attempting to turn them into gold. It's an alchemical pseudonym. This is from his essay called Vegetarianism and Occultism. Vegetarianism and Occultism, which was published in 1913 by the Theosophical Publishing House. I'm going to read an excerpt from the earlier part of the essay, and I'm going to skip over the first entire section of the essay, which is all about the 5 sense aspect of vegetarianism, the bodily aspects of it, okay, which I covered last week. And you can read this. It's going to be posted with the podcast as well. I'm going to pick this up in the section where he talks about the occult reasons for being a vegetarian. But first, he defines what occultism is, and it's one of the best definitions of occultism that I've read. He says, Leadbeater says, quote, "How shall we define occultism? The word is derived from the Latin occultus, meaning hidden, so that it is the study of the hidden laws of nature. Occultism is the study of the hidden laws of nature. Since the great laws of nature are in fact working in the invisible world far more than in the visible, occultism involves the acceptance of a much wider view of nature than that which is ordinarily taken. The occultist, then, is a man who studies all the laws of nature that he can reach or of which he can hear. And as a result of his study, he identifies himself with these laws and devotes his life to the service of evolution." And he doesn't mean macrobiological Darwinian evolutionary theory. He's talking about evolution in consciousness, evolution toward the higher life, toward the higher self. Now, going farther in the document to the section called Occult Reasons for Vegetarianism, he says, quote, "Under this heading, also we shall have 2 sets of reasons, those which refer to ourselves and our own development, and those which refer to the great scheme of evolution and our duty toward it, so that once more we may classify them as selfish and unselfish, although at a much higher level than before. I have, I hope, clearly shown in the earlier part of this lecture that there is simply no room for discussion in regard to the question of vegetarianism. The whole of the evidence and of the considerations are entirely on one side, and there is absolutely nothing to be said in opposition to them. This is even more strikingly the case when we come to consider the occult part of our argument. There are some students hovering round the fringes of occultism who are not yet prepared to follow its dictates to the utmost. And when he says dictates, he's not talking about any particular system of occult teachings. He means the dictates of the laws of nature, which are dictates, meaning they're spoken into inherent reality by the Creator himself, and they're not suggestions. They're laws that are dictated by the Word, the energetic underlying intelligence of all creation. That's why they're natural laws. They're inherent, non-man-made, immutable, binding conditions, which we defined when we talked about natural law. So there are some students hovering around the fringes of occultism who are not yet prepared to follow its dictates to the utmost, and therefore do not accept its teaching when it interferes with their personal habits and desires. I'll say that again. People hovering on the fringes of these great teachings, these laws of nature, who are not yet prepared to follow the dictates of the laws of nature, therefore do not accept its teaching when it interferes with their personal habits and desires. Continuing, quote, some such have tried to maintain that the question of food can make little difference from the occult standpoint. But the unanimous verdict of all the great schools of occultism, both ancient and modern, has been definite on this point, and has asserted that for all true progress, purity is necessary, even on the physical plane, and in matters of diet, as well as in far higher matters. In many books and lectures, I have already explained the existence of the different planes of nature and of the vast unseen world all about us. I have also had occasion to refer often to the fact that man has within himself matter belonging to all these higher planes, so that he is furnished with a vehicle corresponding to each of them, through which he can receive impressions, and by means of which he can act. Can these higher bodies of man be in any way affected by the food which enters into the physical body, with which they are so closely connected? Assuredly they can. And for this reason, the physical matter in man is in close touch with the astral and mental matter. So much so that each is to a great extent a counterpart of the other. So he's saying there's really no separation. They're all affected. Each part of the self, each part of the dense, vital, astral bodies, they're all connected. They're all feeding off of each other's energy. What you do to one, you do to all. This is part of the non-separation, the unity aspect of consciousness. We have to stop looking at the physical and spiritual in separate terms, in terms of separateness. They are one. Continuing. There are many types and degrees of density among astral matter. For example, so that it is possible for one man to have an astral body built of coarse and gross particles, while another may have one which is much more delicate and refined. As the astral body is the vehicle of the emotions, passions, and sensations, it follows that the man whose astral body is of the grosser type will be chiefly amenable to the grosser varieties of passion and emotion, whereas the man who has a finer astral body will find its particles more readily its particles more readily vibrate in response to higher and more refined emotions and aspirations. The man, therefore, who builds gross and undesirable matter into his physical body is thereby drawing into his astral body matter of a coarse and unpleasant type as its counterpart. And then what do you, and I'm interjecting, what do you think will be the result of the behavior of that individual? In most cases. Continuing, quote, we all know that on the physical plane, the effect of overindulgence in dead flesh is to produce a coarse, gross appearance in man. That does not mean that it is only the physical body which is in an unlovely condition. It means also that those parts of the man which are invisible to our ordinary sight, in other words, occulted, the astral and the mental bodies are not in good condition either. Thus, a man who is building himself a gross and impure physical body is building for himself at the same time coarse and unclean astral and mental bodies as well. That is visible at once to the eye of the developed clairvoyant. The man who learns to see these higher vehicles sees at once the effects on the higher bodies produced by impurity in the lower. He sees at once the difference between the man who feeds his physical vehicle with pure food and the man who puts into it this loathsome, decaying flesh. Let us see how this difference will affect the man's evolution. Impure vehicles is the next section. Quote, if it is clear that a man's duty with regard to himself is to develop all his different vehicles as far as possible, in order to make him finished instruments for the use of the soul, there is a still higher stage in which that soul itself is being trained to be a fit instrument in the hands of the deity, a perfect channel for divine grace. But the first step towards this high aim is that the soul itself shall learn thoroughly to control the lower bodies, so that there shall be in them no thought or feeling except those which the soul allows. All these vehicles, therefore, should be in the highest possible condition of efficiency. All should be pure and clean and free from taint. And it is obvious that this can never be so long as the man absorbs into the physical encasement such undesirable constituents. So he's saying garbage in, garbage out. It's very simple. You put that which is of a lower vibratory energy in, you're going to have a lower vibratory energy be built as a result. These are the building materials, not only for the physical vehicle, but for the spiritual vehicles as well. Continuing, quote, even the physical body and its sense perceptions can never be at their best unless the food is pure. Anyone who adopts vegetarian diet will speedily begin to notice that his sense of taste or smell is far keener than it was when he fed upon flesh, and that he is now able to discern a delicate difference of flavors in foods which before he had thought of as tasteless, such as rice or wheat. The same thing is true to a still greater extent with regard to the higher bodies. Their senses cannot be clear if impure or coarse matter is drawn into them. Anything of this nature clogs and dulls them so that it becomes more difficult for the soul to use them. This is a fact which has always been recognized by the student of occultism. You will find that all those who in ancient days entered upon the mysteries were men of utmost purity and of course invariably vegetarian. Carnivorous diet is fatal to anything like real development, and those who adopt it are throwing serious and unnecessary difficulties in their own way. Leadbeater here is making the contention. He's actually claiming that those who studied and partook of the ancient mysteries were in fact almost invariably vegetarian. Continuing, quote, I am well aware that there are other and still higher considerations which are of greater weight than anything upon the physical plane, and that the purity of the heart and soul is more important than that of the body. Yet there is surely no reason why we should not have both. Indeed, the one suggests the other, and the higher should include the lower. There are quite enough difficulties in the way of self-control and self-development. It is surely worse than foolish to go out of our way and add another and very considerable one to the list. Although it is true that a pure heart will do more for us than a pure body, yet the latter can certainly do a great deal. And we are, none of us, so far advanced along the road towards spirituality that we can afford to neglect the great advantage that it gives us. Anything that makes our path harder than it need be is emphatically something to be avoided. In all cases, this flesh food undoubtedly makes the physical body a worse instrument and puts difficulties in the way of the soul by intensifying all the undesirable elements and passions belonging to these lower planes. Nor is this serious effect during physical life the only one of which we have to think. If through inducing loathsome impurities into the physical body, the man builds himself a coarse and unclean astral body, we have to remember that it is in this degraded vehicle that he will have to spend the first part of his life after death, because of the gross matter which he has built into it. All sorts of undesirable entities will be drawn into association with him and will make his vehicles their home, and find a ready response within him to their lower passions. It is not only that his animal passions are more easily stirred here on earth, but in addition to this, he will suffer acutely from the working out of these desires after death. Here again, looked at even from the selfish point of view, we see that occult considerations confirm the straightforward common sense of the arguments on the physical plane. The higher sight, when brought to bear upon this problem, shows us still more vividly how undesirable the devouring of flesh, since it intensifies within us that from which we most need to be free. And therefore, from the point of view of progress, that habit is a thing that can be cast out once and forever. Man's duty toward nature. Then there is the far more important unselfish side of the question, that of man's duty toward nature. Every religion has taught that man should put himself always on the side of the will of God in the world, on the side of good against evil, of evolution as against retrogression. The man who ranges himself on the side of evolution realizes the wickedness of destroying life, for he knows that just as he is here in this physical body, in order that he may learn the lessons of this plane, so is the animal occupying his body for the same reason, that through it he may gain experience at his lower stage. He knows that the life behind the animal is the divine life, and that all life in the world is divine. The animals, therefore, are truly our brothers, even though they may be younger brothers. And we can have no sort of right to take their lives for the gratification of our perverted tastes, no right to cause them untold agony and suffering merely to satisfy our degraded and detestable lusts. We have brought things to such pass with our miscalled sport and our wholesale slaughterings, all that all wild creatures fly from the sight of us. Does that seem like the universal brotherhood of God's creatures? Is that your idea of the golden age of worldwide kindliness that is to come? A condition when every living thing flees from the face of man because of his murderous instincts? There is an influence flowing back upon us from all this, an effect which you can hardly realize unless you are able to see how it looks when regarded with the sight of the higher plane. Every one of these creatures which you so ruthlessly murder in this way has its own thoughts and feelings in regard to all of this. It has horror, pain, and indignation, and an intense but unexpressed feeling of the hideous injustice of it all. The whole atmosphere about us is full of it. Twice lately I have heard from psychic people that they felt the awful aura or surroundings of Chicago, even many miles away from it. Miss Besant herself told me of the same things years ago in England, that long before she came in sight of Chicago, she felt the horror of it and the deadly pall of depression descending upon her, and asked, where are we? And what is the reason that there should be this terrible feeling in the air? To sense the effect as clearly as this is beyond the reach of the person who is not developed. But though all the inhabitants may not be directly conscious of it and recognize it as Mrs. Besant did, they may be sure that they are suffering from it unconsciously, and that terrible vibration of horror and fear and injustice is acting upon every one of them, though they know it not. The feelings of nervousness and profound depression which are so common there are largely due to that awful influence which spreads over the city like a plague cloud. I do not know how many thousands of creatures are killed every day, but the number is very large. Remember that every one of these creatures is a definite entity, not a permanent reincarnating entity like yours or mine, but still an entity which has a life upon the astral plane and persists there for a considerable time. Remember that every one of these remains to pour out his feeling of indignation and horror at all the injustice and torment which has been inflicted upon him. Remember for yourself that the terrible atmosphere which exists about those about those slaughterhouses. Remember that a clairvoyant can see the vast host of animal souls, that he knows how strong are their feelings of horror and resentment, and how those recoil at all the points upon the human race, at all points upon the human race. They react most of all upon those who are at least able to resist them, upon the children who are more delicate and sensitive than the hardened adult. That city is a terrible place in which to bring up children, a place where the whole atmosphere, both physical and psychic, is charged with fumes of blood and with all that that means. So Leadbeater is saying here, the morphogenic field is poisoned. The field of consciousness and energy that we all live in is poisoned as a result of this practice of carnism. And I made reference to that last week and will again in image number 12 on the slideshow. Look at the images and ask yourself the question, what is this practice doing energetically to the field of consciousness in which we are all living? I'm going to pause the reading here to go to a slide number 16 and just have people take a look at what's being said so far in this occult dynamic, the higher hidden dynamic, which is really what we need to understand what we're doing, not only to these beings, but to everyone, to ourselves, to the entire species, to other species most of all, okay? But we need to understand the self-inflicted effects through the laws of correspondence, the higher laws of nature, the laws that ultimately govern the consequences of our behavior. I showed this slide last week, but with no explanation. It was two small fish being eaten or pursued to be eaten by a larger fish, and then that fish ultimately being pursued to be consumed by an even larger fish. People will look at this thing, at this scenario, and they will say, well, that's the natural order. Everything eats everything else. This form of life eats that life, and then that life eats the life below it. And a life above it eats it. And this is a completely erroneous worldview when it comes to what the natural order actually is. This has nothing to do with the, quote, natural order. So I put on this slide, this scene does not depict the, quote, natural order. The natural order is that everything does not eat everything else. That is not what the natural order is. What this scene depicts is chaos, not order. Chaos is depicted in the scene where everything eats everything else, and then is eaten by things above it that have its same level of consciousness, of low consciousness. This is not what the creation has intended for its creations. The Creator has not intended this for all of its creations to suffer in an eternal prison of eating and being eaten. This is a choice that is created by a belief system. That's what this picture is depicting. It depicts the chaos that we have chosen and created for ourselves through our false belief systems, or in other words, religions, of which carnism is one of the biggest on earth, along with the other false organized religions, along with the religion of authority, and ultimately the religion of money, which drives everything. All of our other negative belief systems largely driven by that belief, by that religion. That's the religion of the New World Order, as I called it, is the god of money. The middle fish in this depiction is humanity. That is the middle fish, the one that's eating the smaller fish below it, but being eaten by the big fish above it. That's us, folks. Whether you realize it, recognize it, want it to be true or not, that's us. Not because that's the natural order. That's where we've put ourselves. That's the condition we have created for ourselves by ignoring the laws of creation. And in that ignorance, we're creating this condition. This is not the universal natural order, the way it must be, the way it always has been and forever shall be. That's an erroneous worldview that is not based in truth at all. The fact of the matter is, this is what the human condition has become because of our attachments to religion, to false religious beliefs, to false belief systems in general. So this is what humanity has become like, and this is what humanity will be like for as long as we continue to engage in such fundamentally flawed ideologies like carnism and many others. That attachment is what is going to keep us in that position. And that is what the law of correspondence dictates, that as we do, so shall be done unto us. So if you want to be free, you have to allow other beings to be free. As long as you enslave and consume other beings, you will be enslaved and consumed. That is the law of creation. You just don't want to acknowledge it. You just don't want to admit that's how it is. You don't want to admit that that's the reason why you're in the prison that you're in. The My Freedom movement doesn't want to acknowledge that. It wants to say, I can have things both ways. I can still be a dominator. I can still be involved in the process of murder and domination over other beings, and somehow magically I can still have my freedom bestowed upon me. And it doesn't work that way, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't work that way. Understand the laws of correspondence and causality. We're creating this prison for ourselves by our attachments to false belief systems. We break those false belief systems, we can step out of that chain. Again, this never-ending chain is all about the chain of obedience and attachment to falsity, to lies. We step outside of that attachment, we would be that fish stepping outside of that chain, no longer being a part of it, saying no. Saying no. And that's what it's going to take, that level of will, that level of care, that level of intelligence. Bringing all three of those aspects into harmony, into unison with each other, and engaging them. Now, next week, I'll wrap up the reading, the end of the reading of Leadbeater, but it will also be posted to the website. I think it bears finishing the last two sections where I paused just to finish it. But I want to basically wrap up with a phenomenal quote. This is in image number 17 by Gandhi, image number 17 in the slideshow. Gandhi said that a nation's moral progress can be judged by the way it treats its animals. So I started reading from the essay Vegetarianism and Occultism by C.W. Leadbeater last week. And I didn't get quite to finish that. We were talking about the occult reasons for ceasing the practice of carnism. And I want to finish that reading because we got into the second section where he started transitioning away from, you know, some of the occult reasons we shouldn't do this for our own benefit. But there are also occult reasons, meaning hidden reasons, reasons based upon hidden knowledge, the knowledge of hidden laws of nature, which is what this show is all about. The laws of behavioral consequence, as I call them, or simply natural law, cosmic spiritual law, universal spiritual law is what we're talking about. Again, it needs to be clarified because when you use the term natural, that has a totally hijacked connotation in most people's minds because they've been hammered from their birth with this concept of Darwinism relating to the natural order when it has no such bearing. It has no such connection. So I want to continue reading this document to the end of it. This is Vegetarianism and Occultism by C.W. Leadbeater. We're near the end of the document. I want to pick up from the section called Man's Duty Toward Nature. Then I'm going to read the sections Ghastly Unseen Results and The Better Time to Come. So, quote, Then there is the far more important unselfish side of the question, that of man's duty toward nature. Every religion has taught that man should put himself always on the side of the will of God in this world, on the side of good against evil, of evolution against retrogression. The man who changes himself on the side of evolution realizes the wickedness of destroying life. For he knows that, just as he is here in this physical body, in order that he may learn the lessons of this plane, so is the animal occupying his body for the same reason, that through it he may gain experience at his lower stage. He knows that the life behind the animal is the divine life, that all life in this world is divine, that animals therefore are truly our brothers, even though they may be younger brothers, and we can have no sort of right to take their lives for the gratification of our perverted tastes, no right to cause them untold agony and suffering merely to satisfy our degraded and detestable lusts. Very strong words there by Leadbeater, and I concur. It is our greed, our selfish interest, our attachment that makes us continue this practice. There is no other need for it. It is not a necessity, as we covered 2 weeks ago. We absolutely destroyed the normal, natural, necessary argument right here on this show and gave tons of supportive evidence to that fact. Continuing to quote Leadbeater, quote, "We have brought things to such a pass with our miscalled, quote, sport and our wholesale slaughterings that all wild creatures fly from the sight of us. Does that seem like the universal brotherhood of God's creatures? Is that your idea of the golden age of worldwide kindliness that is to come? A condition when every living thing flies from the face of man because of his murderous instincts? There is an influence flowing back upon us from all this, an effect which you can hardly realize unless you are able to see how it looks when regarded with the sight of the higher plane, the occult plane, in other words, the unseen, the difficult to see." Continuing, "Every one of these creatures which you so ruthlessly murder in this way has its own thoughts and feelings with regard to all this. It has horror, pain, and indignation, and an intense but unexpressed feeling of the hideous injustice of it all. The whole atmosphere about us is full of it. Twice lately I have heard from psychic people that they felt the awful aura of the surroundings of Chicago, even when many miles away from it. Mrs. Besant herself told me the same thing years ago in England, that long before she came in the sight of Chicago, she felt the horror of it and the deadly pall of depression descending upon her, and asked, 'Where are we? And what is the reason that there should be this terrible feeling in the air?' To sense this effect as clearly as this is beyond the reach of the person who is not developed. But though all the inhabitants may not be directly conscious of it and recognize it as Mrs. Besant did, they may be sure that they are suffering from it unconsciously, and that the terrible vibration of horror and fear and injustice is acting upon every one of them, even though they do not know it. In other words, our practices toward animals are affecting the field of consciousness, the interconnected field of energy in which we all are living. We're not separate from that vibratory, energetic field. And whether we're conscious of it or unconscious of it, it is having an effect upon our wellness, upon our well-being, and ultimately upon the conditions that we are living with, that we are living in, that are affecting us every day on a day-to-day basis. We're part of that dynamic. We are driving that dynamic through our behavior. The next section is called Ghastly Unseen Results. Quote, "The feeling of nervousness and profound depression which are so common there are largely due to that awful influence which spreads over the city like a plague cloud. I do not know how many thousands of creatures are killed every day, but the number is very large. Remember that every one of these creatures is a definite entity, not a permanent reincarnating individuality like yours or mine, but still an entity which has its life upon the astral plane and persists there for a considerable time. Remember that every one of these remains to pour out his feelings of indignation and horror at the injustice and torment which has been inflicted upon him. Realize for yourself the terrible atmosphere which exists about those slaughterhouses. Remember that a clairvoyant can see the vast hosts of animal souls, that he knows how strong are their feelings of horror and resentment, and how these recoil at all points upon the human race. They react most of all upon those who are least able to resist them, upon the children who are more delicate and sensitive than the hardened adult. That city is a terrible place in which to bring up children, a place where the whole atmosphere, both physical and psychic, is charged with fumes of blood and with all that that means. And Leadbeater is talking about the city of Chicago back at the turn of the century, which was the biggest meat production facility in the entire country and probably still is. Continuing, quote, I read an article only the other day in which it was explained that the nauseating stench which rises from those Chicago slaughterhouses and settles like a fatal miasma over the city is by no means the most deadly influence that comes up from that Christian hell for animals, though it is the breath of certain death to many a mother's darling. The slaughterhouses make not only a pest hole for the bodies of children, but for their souls as well. Not only are the children employed in the most revolting and cruel work, but the whole trend of their thoughts is directed toward killing. Occasionally one is found too sensitive to endure the sights and sounds of that ceaseless, awful battle between man's cruel lust and the inalienable right of every creature to its own life. It's all about the principle of ownership, folks. Don't take what you don't own. It's not your life to take from that animal. It is their life. They own their life. That is their right, as Leadbeater says. The right, the inalienable right of every creature to its own life. I read how one boy, continuing to quote, I read how one boy, from whom a minister had secured a place in the slaughterhouse, returned home day after day, pale and sick and unable to eat or sleep. And again, I guess this is even before some, child labor laws, and these children were put to work in these slaughterhouses back then. It's horrific. Continuing, he was day after day, pale and sick, unable to eat or sleep, and finally came to that minister of the gospel of the compassionate Christ and told him that he was willing to starve if necessary, but that he could not wade in blood another day. The horrors of the slaughter had so affected him that he could no longer sleep. Yet this is what many a boy is doing and seeing from day to day until he becomes hardened to the taking of life. And then someday, instead of cutting the throat of a lamb or a pig, he kills a man. And straightway we turn our lust for slaughter upon him and think that we have done justice. I read that a young woman who does much philanthropic work in the neighborhood of these pest houses declares that what most impresses her about the children is that they seem to have no games except games of killing. That they have no conception of any relation to animals except the relation of the slaughterer to the victim. This is the education which so-called Christians are giving to the children of the slaughterhouse, a daily education in murder. And then they express surprise at the number and brutality of the murders in that district. Yet your Christian public goes on serenely saying its prayers and singing its psalms and listening to its sermons, as if no such outrages were being perpetrated against God's children in that sinkhole of pestilence and crime. Surely the habit of eating dead flesh has produced a moral apathy among us. A moral apathy among us. Are you doing well, do you think, in rearing your future citizens among surroundings of such utter brutality as this? Even on the physical plane, this is a terribly serious matter. And from the occult point of view, it is unfortunately far more serious still. For the occultist sees the psychic results of all this, sees how these forces are acting upon the people, and how they intensify brutality and unscrupulousness. He sees what a center of vice and crime you have created, and how from it the infection is gradually spreading until it affects the whole country and even the whole of what is called civilized humanity. And I'll jump in there and say, exactly. This is affecting the entire morphic field of consciousness that we are a part of. You engage in these practices, they do not stay where they are at. And just because you try to hide them and erect huge walls and fences, that doesn't mean that that energy isn't going beyond that area just because people aren't seeing it. If you want to really see what these practices are, and I guarantee you what you're even seeing there is not even the worst of it by any stretch of the imagination, watch the movie Earthlings. Watch it all the way through. Try to watch it through without looking away from the screen. And I'll bet you can't even do it. Most people don't have the stomach to do it. I congratulate someone who has the stomach to even sit through the entire thing. You have a strong constitution, and it should affect you negatively. That's what it's designed to do, and it's doing a good job of it, that documentary. It should make you feel sick, because that's the energy we're all taking in as a result of these practices. And you think that that's going to build a good body and brain? Please. Continuing with the document, quote, "The world is being affected by it in many ways, which most people do not in the least realize. There are constant feelings of causeless terror in the air. Many of your children are unnecessarily and inexplicably afraid. They feel terror of they know not what, terror of the dark, or when they are alone for a few moments. Strong forces are playing about us for which you cannot account. And you do not realize that this all comes from the fact that the whole atmosphere is charged with the hostility of these murdered creatures. The stages of evolution are closely interrelated, and you cannot do wholesale murder in this way upon your younger brothers without feeling the effect terribly among your own innocent children. Surely a better time shall come, when we shall be free from this horrible blot upon our civilization, this awful reproach upon our compassion and our sympathy. And when that comes, we shall find presently that there will be a vast improvement in these matters, and by degrees we shall all rise to a higher level and be freed from all these instinctive terrors and hatreds. The better time to come. We might all be freed from it very soon if men and women would only think. For the average man is not, after all, a brute, but means to be kind if he only knew how. He does not think. Let me repeat that again. He does not think. He goes on from day to day and does not realize that he is taking part all the time in an awful crime. But facts are facts, and there is no escape from them. Everyone who is partaking of this abomination is helping to make this appalling thing a possibility, and undoubtedly shares the responsibility for it. You know that this is so. You know that this is so. And you can see what a terrible thing it is, but you will say, what can we do to improve matters? We who are only tiny units in this mighty seething mass of humanity. It is only by units rising above the rest and becoming more civilized that we shall finally arrive at a higher civilization of the race as a whole. Let me read that sentence again, folks, because that's probably the most important sentence in this essay. It is only by units rising above the rest and becoming more civilized that we shall finally arrive at a higher civilization of the race as a whole. The quantum effect that I've been talking about, that many people have been talking about. It doesn't matter if you don't perceive that a lot of other people are doing it. It eventually, as individual units change themselves, a quantum effect will be built up as that amount rises, and it will eventually spill over to the whole. It is about numbers, but we need to get to that critical mass number when this becomes common sense knowledge. Our consciousness being elevated by desisting in such murderous practices, just, lifting our own consciousness up will be an influence in the whole field of consciousness for the totality of the all. Continuing, the quote, there is a golden age to come, not only for man, but for the lower kingdoms. A time when humanity will realize its duty to its younger brothers, not to destroy them, but to help them and train them, so that we may receive from them not terror and hatred, but love and devotion, and friendship, and reasonable cooperation. A time will come when all the forces of nature shall be intelligently working together towards the final end, not with constant suspicion and hostility, but with universal recognition of that brotherhood which is ours, because we are all children of the same Almighty Father. Let us at least make the experiment. Let us free ourselves from complicity in these awful crimes. Let us set ourselves to try. That's like that. I called that on the show, breaking in just for a moment. I called that phrase on the show on Rosicrucianism that I did with Bob from Cincinnati on Occult Empire. That's the ultimate Rosicrucian commandment. Try. We must try to improve ourselves, engage the will to make ourselves better than we were the day before. If we're doing that, no one can fault us. Let us, continuing, quote, let us set ourselves to try, each in our own small circle, to bring nearer that bright time of peace and love, which is the dream and the earnest desire of every true-hearted and thinking man. At least we ought surely to be willing to do a small thing as this, so small a thing as this, to help the world onward toward that glorious future. We ought to make ourselves pure, our thoughts and our actions, as well as our food, so that by example, as well as by precept, we may be doing all that in us lies to spread the gospel of love and compassion, to put an end to the reign of brutality and terror, and to bring nearer the dawn of the great kingdom of righteousness and love, when the will of our Father shall be done upon the earth as it is in heaven. And I mean, that is just so profoundly powerful.